Hi, welcome to another episode of the Ambient Mellotron here on the Ambient iPad. Let's make some music. It's still cold out and it's still the holiday season, so I'd like to do another improvisation using a bell-like sound. In this case, the Celeste 66 from the Mellotron M400 sound library. The signal chain is the Mellotron M4000D Mini. Its master mono analog output goes into a Focusrite Scarlett 18i8 interface, which communicates back and forth with the iPad Pro through a USB-C hub that also lets me power the iPad Pro at the same time. So the Celeste is also known as the bell piano. A Celeste, you hit the key, the hammer hits a metal plate, kind of like a glockenspiel, whereas a piano, you hit the key, the hammer hits a string. And there's two Celestes on the Mellotron, both from the M400, the Celeste 66 and the Celeste 74. Let's get apeMatrix set up here and we'll sample those sounds. The first thing I need to do is we actually have a mono input, so we need to go to USB 1. Let me add a compressor so we can have some sound. I've used the Audio Damage Rough Rider in the last few videos, so let's mix it up a little and use the Bleass Compressor. And there's just a standard basic sound here that I'm going to use. Typically when I'm using a compressor, I just pick whatever is the standard basic sound, not necessarily the default one. Typically that's a ratio of 4:1, and all the other settings are pretty standard. Those are types of the settings that I'll use with a bass, and I'm used to using a compressor with a bass, so that's my frame of reference. Actually, on a bass, I typically prefer like 3:1 or 2:1, but 4:1 will work fine. I use a compressor on the Mellotron because I just want to even out the sound, and I also want to raise the volume slightly of the softer sounds. All right, let's connect this. Right now I'm on the Celeste 66, which is what we're going to use. Here's a sample of that one. Then I'll switch to the Celeste 74 so you can hear the difference, and I'll go back to the 66. So you can hear there's a slight difference between them. The 74 is a little more, I'll use the word high fidelity. That's kind of a cop-out with the Mellotron because obviously tapes that were made for the later Mellotrons typically are of a higher quality, but there is different characteristics to the Celeste that you can hear there. But we're going to stick with the 66 one, the reason being it's a little more of a rounded sound and a little more bell-like. It reminds me a lot of the Celeste I first came upon in recorded music was Thelonious Monk on Brilliant Corners. He uses a Celeste on one piece. And that's always been what reminds me of the Celeste, even though it's been used in a lot of other music. It's the holiday season, so I'm using bell-like sounds. So let's just add some more effects. Not a lot. I'm just going to do the traditional. I'll do a modulation and a delay and reverb and maybe something else. So speaking of modulation, why don't we use a phaser? And I don't want to use the FAC phaser. Actually, I'm going to use a phaser I don't use that often from Audio Damage Phase 3, which is essentially a Mellotron. And there's essentially two phasers, and you have a lot of different controls here. One patch I like is called pan phase. So let's listen to pan phase. I'll turn it off. We'll hear it clean, and then I'll turn it back on. So here's the Celeste 66 going through the compressor and the phaser. So not overly dramatic, but it does add a little bit of modulation and movement. I actually want to accentuate that movement. So, rotary. I think I want to use a rotary sound, and Eventide Rotary, why not? I don't use this that often. And there's actually a really subtle patch. They actually have them listed under subtle and intense. Let's try this one, which I've used before in some stuff, so I know that it's really subtle. One thing I do want to do is let me turn off the, not the compressor, the phaser first. All right, so I'll do the rotary sound, and then I'll turn it off, and then I'll turn it back on, similar to what I did with the phaser. So another subtle modulation sound, but you can hear that rotary movement, and really takes advantage of the stereo field as well. Let me add the phaser back in, and we'll hear what those sound like together. Now, I'm doing the effects in parallel right now, so they each go to the output, summed at the output, but the sounds do change, as I've shown in other videos, when we go in series. And some of these effects I will do in series, but I want to get them all set up first. All right, so here's in series the compressor, the phaser, and the rotary. So definitely a little more dramatic by taking two subtle modulations that kind of go in different movements. It definitely is a much more richer sound now. Let me try that again. All right, next, guess what it's going to be? Delay. And you can probably guess, if you've watched a number of videos, that it'll be the K7D from Imaginando, because I do like this tape. Whoops. Tape delay. Let's go to, let's try this. I'm going to turn off the modulations, and let's hear this, and I'm going to do some tweaking, I'm sure. Let me turn the feedback down a little. So what I've done here is I've taken a stock patch that I created, just called Basic Tape Delay. I synced it, so we're going in a quarter note sync, even though I'm not really using a tempo. It still does give a rhythmic, and I can kind of follow that. The feedback was just a little too high. I had a little wound flutter too, and I ping-ponged it. So I'm going to lower the feedback a little. Let me play it with the current feedback, and then you'll hear it lower. It still may be a little too much, but we'll see. May just put the wet dry down a little. All right, we'll see what this sounds like in the mix. And let me add everything else back in. The two modulations, phaser and rotary, delay, here's everything, again in parallel. All right, let's add reverb, last effect. And I'm really liking Audio Reverb by Virsyn. I've used it a number of times, but there's just so many different options in here. And because this is a single keyboard, I like to do more of a like concert hall type sound. I don't want it too big, so let's hear what this sounds like, concert hall. All right, that sounds nice. Try jazz hall, I like this too. I mean, they're both really similar. Concert hall's just a little bigger, so let's do that. Ditching the modulation. All right, so right now all the effects are in parallel. Now I want to put some of them in series. So I'd like to run the compressor into the phaser. Then we can turn that off direct out. Then I want to run the phaser into the rotary effect. Then I don't want to run the rotary effect into the delay. That I know. I want to have that go direct out, and then let's have the delay go direct out too. Let's hear what this sounds like. Okay, you get this nice kind of vibrato-y, phasey thing. Let's try it without the phaser. That's good too, so maybe I'll go back and forth. The reverb's a little too big. I'm gonna go back to jazz hall, which is smaller. Slightly smaller. We can tell by the reverb time. With concert hall, it's like 4. It's in the 4-second range. Reverb time is in the 3-second range for jazz hall. So here we go again. Still a little too much of the delay here for my liking, so let me turn that mix down just a little. Like that a little better. I might tweak it a little more. Let's have the phaser back in again, going into the rotary effect. So I'll use both sounds, with the phaser and without. I'll come up with some touch point. Something like that might work. Let's try it. Turn the phaser off. Like that. Now we need another part. See if those two go together. Okay, that'll be the head, so that'll be my touch point. I'll do some stuff with that. The effects are just still, even though I picked subtle settings, they're still in combination, they're still a little over the top. So I'm going to go in and just kind of tweak some mixes in the effects a little, and then I will do an improv with the Celeste 66 from the Mellotron M400 sound set. A pretty straightforward improvisation today using the Celeste 66 sound from the Mellotron M400. I used just a few effects, mainly modulation, a phaser, and Eventide's Rotary. I had them both set up with subtle settings, but combined, it was a much more richer and deeper sound, almost a vibrato in some points. Then just a little bit of the K7D tape delay for some movement, and of course reverb from Audio Reverb, but not a big expansive one. This was more of a stage reverb. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and good luck with your own music.